The gunshot echoed across the river valley, sending a flock of sparrows darting into the cloud-streaked sky above the winding Colorado River. Grace Remington clutched her swollen belly, her heart pounding wildly as she watched the wagon disappear into the distance, carrying away her husband and any hope for a safe passage across the dangerous waters. It was 1874, a blistering summer in the Arizona Territory, and Grace was alone. Her dress was torn, her lips parched from thirst, and the baby inside her kicked furiously, as if sensing its mother's desperation. 6 months pregnant and abandoned, she sank to her knees at the river's edge, watching the unforgiving current that separated her from Willits, the mining settlement where she'd hoped to start anew. "Chester, how could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking as tears carved clean paths down her dust-covered cheeks. The memory of his cold eyes still haunted her. "The gold's on the other side," he'd said flatly before pushing her from the wagon. "And you're slowing me down." Grace pressed her palm against her belly, feeling another kick. "It's just us now, little one," she murmured. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Night would come soon, bringing with it the coyotes and other dangers of the wild. She hadn't noticed the rider approaching until the sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her despair. Startled, she turned to see a lone figure on horseback cresting the hill behind her, silhouetted against the setting sun. The man dismounted with practiced ease, his movements fluid despite his tall frame. As he approached, Grace could make out a weathered face beneath the brim of his hat, stubble lining a strong jaw and eyes that held both wariness and concern. "Madam," he said, removing his hat as he approached, revealing tousled dark hair. "Owen Calloway's my name. Couldn't help but notice you seemed to be in some trouble." Grace instinctively backed away, one hand still protecting her unborn child. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, though her trembling voice betrayed her. Owen's gaze moved from her face to her belly, then to the river, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Was that your husband who just left?" he asked quietly. Grace nodded, unable to find words through her shame and fear. "Heading to Willits?" he inquired, gesturing to the distant shore. "Yes," she whispered. He said I was slowing him down. The gold fever's got him. Said he'd send for me, but—" She couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew what kind of promise that had been. Owen replaced his hat, shaking his head slowly. "No man worth his salt abandons his wife and child," he said, a hint of anger coloring his words. He looked at the river, then back at Grace. "Night's coming. You can't stay here." He gestured to a small stand of cottonwood trees about 50 yards from the riverbank. "I've got a camp over yonder. Food, clean water, and a fire. You're welcome to it while I figure out how to get you across." Grace hesitated, weighing her options. Trust this stranger or face the night alone. "I won't harm you, madam," Owen said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. "On my mother's grave, I swear it, but that baby needs you safe and fed." Something in his earnest expression convinced her. Grace nodded and allowed him to help her to her feet. As they walked toward his camp, she felt the baby settle as if somehow comforted by this turn of events. "Thank you," she said simply. Owen nodded, leading his horse by the reins. "Got a name, madam?" "Grace," she replied. "Grace Remington." "Well, Miss Grace," he said, "let's get you taken care of, and tomorrow we'll figure out how to cross that river." The campfire crackled, casting dancing shadows across their faces as night settled over the Arizona wilderness. Grace sat on a bedroll, sipping hot coffee from a tin cup, her hunger now satisfied by the simple but hearty meal Owen had prepared: beans, jerky, and hardtack softened in the beans' juices. "You're heading to Willits too?" she asked, watching him stoke the fire with a stick. Owen nodded. Got a small cattle ranch about 10 miles outside town. Been in Tucson selling some stock." He paused, studying her. "What waits for you in Willits, besides that husband of yours?" Grace sighed, setting down her cup. "Nothing certain. Chester heard about the new silver deposits. Said we could make our fortune." She laughed bitterly. "I should have known better. It's been the same story in 3 territories now." Owen remained silent, giving her space to continue if she wished. "We were married 2 years ago in Kansas," Grace said after a moment. "I was a school teacher." He was charming, full of dreams. Her hand moved to her belly. "This little one wasn't part of his plan, I suppose." "His loss," Owen said simply. "A man who runs from responsibility isn't much of a man." The night grew deeper, and Grace felt exhaustion washing over her. Owen noticed and prepared a proper place for her to sleep, using his bedroll while he took only a blanket for himself. "Get some rest," he told her. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." As Grace lay down, she realized it was the first time in months she felt truly safe. The baby seemed to agree, kicking once before settling. She watched Owen through half-closed eyes as he sat vigilant by the fire, his profile strong against the night sky. What kind of man, she wondered, went out of his way to help a stranger in distress? Morning came with the call of desert birds and the soft glow of sunrise. Grace awoke to find Owen already up, cooking something that smelled wonderfully like flapjacks over the rekindled fire. "You slept well," he observed, handing her a plate. "Good. You'll need your strength today." After breakfast, Owen stood at the river's edge, hands on his hips, surveying the rushing water. "Ferry's about 20 miles south," he said. "Too far in your condition." "What will we do?" Grace asked, trying to mask the worry in her voice. Owen gestured to a stand of trees. "Build a raft. It won't be pretty, but it'll get us across." For the next several hours, Grace watched in amazement as Owen worked. His hands, strong and capable, chopped down several small trees with the axe from his pack. He stripped the branches, then used rope to lash the logs together, creating a simple but sturdy platform. "My pa and I used to trap along the Missouri," he explained as he worked. "Built many a raft in those days." By mid-afternoon, the raft was finished, crude but solid, with raised sides to keep them safe from the current. Owen had fashioned a long pole for steering and tested the craft's stability by standing on it at the water's edge. "It'll hold," he declared with satisfaction. "We should cross now while the light's good." Grace felt fear rise in her throat as she stared at the rushing water. "I can't swim," she confessed. Owen offered a reassuring smile. "Neither can my horse, but we're all going to make it across just fine." He secured their belongings and helped Grace onto the raft, positioning her in the center where she would be most stable. Then, with remarkable strength, he led his reluctant horse into the shallows and onto the raft, soothing the animal with quiet words. "Ready?" he asked Grace, who clutched the raised edge with white knuckles. She nodded, not trusting her voice. With a powerful push, Owen sent them into the current, immediately fighting to control their direction with the long pole. The river grabbed them eagerly, spinning them slightly before Owen's skilled hands brought them back on course. "Keep your weight centered," he instructed calmly, though Grace could see the strain in his arms as he fought the current. The crossing seemed to take forever, each moment filled with the rush of water and Grace's silent prayers. Halfway across, the raft hit something underwater, jolting violently. Grace cried out, but Owen steadied them, his face set with determination. "Almost there," he encouraged her, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool water spraying up around them. When they finally bumped against the opposite shore, Grace nearly sobbed with relief. Owen secured the raft, then helped her onto dry land, her legs wobbly with fear and adrenaline. "We made it," she breathed. looking back at the river that had seemed so impossibly wide. Owen nodded, leading his horse off the raft. Willits is about half a day's ride from here. We can make it by nightfall if we push on. As he helped her mount his horse, Grace found herself studying his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years in the sun, the small scar on his chin, the kindness in his expression that had been so absent in Chester's. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "You don't know me." "You don't owe me anything." Owen adjusted the stirrups for her comfort before answering. "My ma always said that a person's character is shown in how they treat those who can give them nothing in return." He shrugged, as if embarrassed by his own words. "Besides, no woman should be left alone in her condition, especially not by someone who promised to care for her." With that, he began leading the horse toward Willits, walking beside rather than riding, his long strides eating up the miles. Grace watched the back of his head, the set of his shoulders, and felt something stir within her that had nothing to do with the baby's movements. The trail to Willits wound through rugged country, climbing into pine-covered hills that offered occasional glimpses of the valley below. Despite his obvious fatigue, Owen maintained a steady pace, stopping only when he sensed Grace needed rest. During one such break, as they shared water and dried apples from his provisions, Grace asked, "Have you always lived in these parts?" Owen shook his head. "Missouri born and raised. Came west after the war, fought for the Union," he added, almost as an afterthought. "My father and brothers did too," Grace said softly. "Only my youngest brother came home." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Lost my brother at Shiloh. Pa couldn't bear it, passed within the year. After that, there wasn't much holding me there." "So you came west to start over," Grace observed. "Something like that," he agreed. "Worked cattle drives for years, saved every penny, finally had enough for my own spread 2 years back. And you've been alone all this time?" she asked before she could stop herself. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Not much time for courting when you're building something from nothing." He helped her back onto the horse. "But I've got good land, healthy cattle, and a roof that doesn't leak. That's more than many can claim." As the afternoon wore on, Grace found herself increasingly grateful for Owen's steady presence. When they finally crested a hill to see Willits spread out before them, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, with mine entrances visible on the surrounding hillsides, she felt a curious mix of relief and apprehension. "There it is," Owen said. "Not much to look at, but it's home." Grace scanned the town, wondering if Chester was already there, already gambling away whatever money they had left in pursuit of his dreams of wealth. The thought no longer pained her as it once had. "You have somewhere to stay?" Owen asked as they began the descent into town. The question brought her back to reality. Chester was supposed to arrange something, she admitted, but given the circumstances, Owen nodded thoughtfully. "There's a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Abernathy. Decent place, reasonable rates. She might even have work for you, if you're inclined." The main street of Willits was busy with the evening's activities, miners heading to saloons after their shift, shopkeepers closing up, ladies hurrying to finish their errands before dark. Several people called out greetings to Owen as they passed, and he responded with friendly nods. "You're well known here," Grace observed. "Small town," he replied. "Hard not to be." They stopped outside a 2-story building with a sign reading Abernathy Boarding House. Owen helped Grace dismount, her body stiff from the journey. "Let me speak with Mrs. Abernathy," he said, tying his horse to the hitching post. "She can be particular about her tenants, but she's got a soft spot for those in need." Before they could reach the door, it swung open, revealing a stout woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her expression softened when she saw Owen. "Mr. Calloway," she greeted him warmly. "Didn't expect to see you in town so soon after your Tucson trip. Mrs. Abernathy," he returned the greeting, removing his hat. "I've brought someone who needs lodging. This is Mrs. Grace Remington. She's had a difficult journey." The older woman's shrewd eyes took in Grace's condition, the weariness in her stance, and the dusty dress that had seen better days. To Grace's surprise, there was no judgment in her gaze, only concern. "Come in, child," Mrs. Abernathy said, holding the door wider. "You look dead on your feet." As they entered the tidy foyer, Owen explained Grace's situation in hushed tones, omitting the details of Chester's abandonment but making it clear she needed help. Mrs. Abernathy nodded decisively. "I've got a room at the back, nice and quiet. As for payment—" She paused, looking Grace over again. "I could use help with the cooking and cleaning. My hands aren't what they used to be." Relief washed over Grace. "I'm a hard worker, madam, and I was a school teacher back in Kansas. I could help with letters or accounts as well." "Education, is it, Mrs.?" Abernathy looked pleased. "Well now, that's something Willits needs more of. We've got children running wild with barely a lick of learning." She nodded to herself. Yes, this might work out just fine. As the arrangements were settled, Grace became acutely aware that soon Owen would leave. The thought filled her with unexpected sadness. "Thank you," she said when they stepped outside for him to take his leave. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Owen shifted uncomfortably, not meeting her eyes. "No need for that. Just take care of yourself and that baby." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. "My ranch is northwest of town," Owen finally said. "If you ever need anything—" He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "I come into Willits most Saturdays for supplies." Grace nodded, understanding the unspoken invitation. "I'll remember that." With a tip of his hat, Owen mounted his horse and rode away. Grace watched until he disappeared around a corner, then turned back to the boarding house, her new home for now. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Grace placed her hands on her belly and whispered to her child, "We're safe now, little one, and maybe, just maybe, we've found a friend in this wild place." The next morning brought new routines and responsibilities. Mrs. Abernathy, call me Eliza, dear, proved to be a fair employer but exacting in her standards. The boarding house catered primarily to minors who could afford better than the saloon rooms, but hadn't brought families west. Clean rooms, good food, and strict rules about behavior kept the establishment respectable. Grace quickly settled into her role, finding comfort in the structured days. Her pregnancy limited some activities, but her skills in the kitchen and with numbers made her valuable nonetheless. Within a week, she had reorganized the pantry, improved the accounting ledger, and started tutoring 2 of the town's children whose parents were willing to pay for education. Throughout it all, she kept an ear open for news of Chester, though she told herself it was merely prudence, not lingering attachment. It wasn't long before she heard the gossip he'd arrived in town the same day as she had, immediately sought out the largest card game at the Silver Dollar Saloon, and lost most of his money in a single night. "Foolish man," Eliza commented when Grace finally confided the full story of her abandonment. "Though Willits has seen worse, truth be told, at least he didn't leave you for dead." Grace said nothing, but her thoughts turned to Owen and his kindness. As promised, he came to town the following Saturday. She spotted him from the boarding house window, unloading supplies from a small wagon. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she grabbed a basket of fresh muffins and hurried outside. "Mr. Calloway," she called, approaching the general store where he was tying his horses. Owen turned, surprise evident on his face before a smile broke through. "Mrs. Remington, you're looking well. And she was. A week of regular meals and rest had brought color back to her cheeks. Her hair was neatly arranged, and she wore one of Eliza's altered dresses that accommodated her condition while still appearing presentable. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, offering the basket, "and to let you know I've found employment with Mrs. Abernathy. She's been very kind." Owen accepted the basket with a nod of appreciation. "Glad to hear it. Willits could use more people like you." They stood awkwardly for a moment before Grace gathered her courage. "Would you care to join me for lunch? Mrs. Abernathy makes an excellent stew on Saturdays." Something like pleasure flickered in Owen's eyes before he glanced at the sky, gauging the time. "I'd be honored, but I have business with the blacksmith first, perhaps in an hour." "That would be perfect," Grace replied, ignoring the flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby's movements. Lunch stretched into a long conversation. Owen proved to be an attentive listener and, when coaxed, an engaging storyteller. His tales of cattle drives and the characters he'd met along the way made Grace laugh for what felt like the first time in years. As he prepared to leave, loading his supplies into his wagon, he hesitated. "I'll be back next Saturday," he said, the statement somehow both casual and significant. Grace nodded. "I'll save you some pie. Mrs. Abernathy is teaching me her recipe." It became their routine Saturday lunches filled with conversation that grew more personal with each passing week. Grace learned about Owen's dreams for his ranch, his love of horses, and his quiet determination to build something lasting. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Illinois, her passion for teaching, and her hopes for her child's future. Through it all, they carefully avoided discussing Chester, though Grace occasionally saw Owen's jaw tighten when minors mentioned the man's increasingly desperate gambling and drinking. 3 weeks after her arrival in Willits, as Grace was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house, a shadow fell across her work. She turned to find Chester swaying slightly, his clothes disheveled and his face haggard. "There you are," he slurred, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "Been looking everywhere." Grace instinctively stepped back, one hand going to her now 7-month belly. "What do you want, Chester?" "What do I want?" he mimicked, anger flashing across his features. "You're my wife. I want you to come with me. Got a line on a new claim, need money to buy in." "I don't have any money," Grace said firmly, though her heart pounded with fear. "And I'm not going anywhere with you." Chester took a threatening step forward. "Don't sass me, woman. You're still my property by law." Before Grace could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "That's far enough, Remington." Owen stood at the corner of the building, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as steel. Chester sneered. "This ain't your business, Calloway. You made it my business when you abandoned your pregnant wife at the Colorado," Owen replied evenly. "Now I suggest you move along before this gets ugly." For a moment, Chester looked like he might argue further, but something in Owen's expression made him reconsider. "This ain't over," he muttered, pointing a shaky finger at Grace before staggering away. Once he was gone, Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said shakily. Owen moved closer, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" Grace nodded, though tears threatened. "I thought I was done being afraid of him." "He won't bother you again," Owen promised, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't know that," Grace whispered. Owen hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Grace, would you consider coming to stay at my ranch until the baby comes? It's peaceful there and far from town." "Chester wouldn't know where to find you." The offer stunned her. "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Owen interrupted. "I have a spare room, and—" He paused, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "I'd rest easier knowing you were safe." Grace studied his face, seeing nothing but sincerity in his expression. "What about my work here? Eliza depends on me. We can figure something out, Owen said. Maybe you could come into town a couple days a week or teach from the ranch. There are several families nearby with children who could use schooling. The idea was tempting not just for safety, but for the chance to be near Owen, whose presence had become increasingly important to her. Still, she hesitated. "Let me think about it," she finally said, "and speak with Eliza." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. I'll be in town until tomorrow noon." That night, Grace barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. By morning, she had reached a decision. Eliza, far from being upset at the prospect of losing her helper, was enthusiastically supportive. "That man has lived alone too long," she declared, "and you need protection that I can't provide. Besides," she added with a knowing look, "I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." 2 days later, Grace found herself riding in Owen's wagon toward his ranch, leaving Willits and Chester behind. The journey took several hours, winding through pine forests and open meadows until they crested a hill that revealed a valley below. "There it is," Owen said with quiet pride, pointing to a sturdy cabin nestled against a stand of trees. A barn and corral stood nearby, with cattle dotting the surrounding pastures. "It's not much yet, but it's home." To Grace, it looked like paradise. "It's beautiful," she said honestly, taking in the sweeping views and peaceful setting. The cabin itself was simple but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a main living area, and a kitchen. Owen had clearly made efforts to prepare for her arrival. The spare room was cleaned and furnished with a bed topped with a handmade quilt, and fresh wildflowers sat in a jar on the small table by the window. "My mother's quilt," he explained when he caught her admiring it. "One of the few things I brought from Missouri." Grace ran her hand over the intricate stitching. "It's lovely. She was talented." "She would have liked you," Owen said softly, then quickly added, "I'll let you get settled. Take all the time you need." The next few weeks passed in a comfortable rhythm. Grace took over most of the cooking and indoor tasks, while Owen tended to the cattle and land. Twice a week, they rode into town together, Grace to continue her tutoring and help Eliza with the accounts, Owen for supplies and business. On the days they stayed at the ranch, Grace found herself watching Owen work, admiring his skill with horses and his patient handling of the livestock. Sometimes he would catch her eye across the yard and smile, a warm expression that made her heart skip. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their conversations flowed easily now, comfortable silences interspersed with shared observations and gentle laughter. It was during one such evening, as September gave way to October and the air carried the first hint of autumn crispness, that Grace felt the baby shift dramatically, followed by a sharp pain that made her gasp. Owen was immediately alert. "What is it?" "Just a strong kick," she assured him, though something felt different this time. "The baby's been restless today." Owen looked unconvinced but didn't press the issue. As the night progressed, however, the pains came more frequently. By midnight, there was no denying what was happening. "Owen," Grace called from her bedroom doorway, finding him still awake, reading by lamplight. "I think the baby's coming." His book dropped to the floor as he stood, alarm clear on his face. "But it's too early. You said late November." "Babies don't always follow schedules," Grace replied, wincing as another contraction gripped her. Owen ran a hand through his hair, thinking quickly. "The doctor in Willits is 3 hours away, even pushing hard." "There's no time," Grace said, somehow certain. "This baby is coming fast." The next few hours were a blur of pain and fear, but also of Owen's steady presence. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and held Grace's hand through each contraction, his strength anchoring her when the pain threatened to overwhelm. "My sister had 4 children," he explained when Grace questioned his unexpected knowledge of childbirth. "I was there for 2 of them when her husband was away. Never thought I'd be using that experience again." As dawn broke across the eastern sky, casting golden light through the cabin windows, Grace gave a final push, and her child entered the world with a lusty cry. "A boy," Owen announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the infant in a clean cloth. "A strong, perfect boy." He placed the newborn in Grace's arms, and she felt tears of joy stream down her face as she looked at her son's tiny features. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "You've had quite a journey already." When she looked up, she found Owen watching them, something unreadable in his expression. "Thank you," she said fervently. "I couldn't have done this without you." Owen shook his head, humbled. "You did all the hard work, I just caught him." Grace laughed weakly, then looked down at her son again. "He needs a name." "What will you call him?" Owen asked. Grace considered for a moment, then smiled. "Gabriel. It means God is my strength, and after everything that's happened, I believe that more than ever." "Gabriel," Owen repeated softly. "It suits him." In the days that followed, Owen showed a natural affinity with the baby, holding him confidently while Grace rested, speaking to him in low, gentle tones, and seeming completely unfazed by the more unpleasant aspects of infant care. "You're good with him," Grace observed one evening as Owen paced the cabin floor with Gabriel cradled against his shoulder, soothing the fussy newborn. Owen glanced up, a smile touching his lips. "He makes it easy. Got a good temperament, this one." Something about the tender scene before her, this strong man so gentle with her child, made Grace's heart swell with an emotion she was finally ready to name. In the weeks they'd spent together, Owen Calloway had become essential to her in ways she'd never anticipated, but she held her tongue. Despite his kindness, despite the moments when she caught him looking at her with what seemed like longing, Owen had never spoken of feelings beyond friendship. And with her marriage to Chester still legally binding, what future could they possibly have? The answer came unexpectedly, nearly 2 weeks after Gabriel's birth. They were eating breakfast when a rider approached the cabin. Owen went to the door, hand instinctively moving to the rifle kept nearby, but relaxed when he recognized the visitor. "It's Sheriff Taylor from Willits," he told Grace, who was nursing Gabriel by the fire. The sheriff removed his hat as he entered, nodding respectfully to Grace before addressing Owen. "Got some news I thought you should hear directly, rather than through gossip." "What is it?" Owen asked, offering the man coffee. Sheriff Taylor accepted the cup with thanks. "It's about Chester Remington." He glanced at Grace. "Madam, I'm sorry to inform you that your husband is dead." Grace felt a rush of conflicting emotions: shock, guilt, and something that felt uncomfortably like relief. "What happened?" she managed to ask. "Caught cheating at cards last night at the Silver Dollar," the sheriff explained grimly. "Pulled a knife on the wrong man. Mining foreman named Jackson put a bullet in him before he could use it. Self-defense, clear as day. No charges filed." Grace nodded numbly, looking down at Gabriel, who had fallen asleep at her breast, blissfully unaware of how his world had just changed again. "There's something else," Sheriff Taylor continued. "We found letters in his room. Seems he was married before, has a wife still living in Denver, never divorced her." The revelation struck Grace like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "Legally speaking, madam, you were never his wife," the sheriff said gently. "Bigamy's a crime. The marriage wasn't valid." After the sheriff departed, promising to handle the necessary paperwork, Grace sat in stunned silence. Owen moved quietly around the cabin, giving her space to process everything. Finally, he sat across from her. "Are you all right?" Grace considered the question seriously. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted. Shocked, angry that he lied about something so fundamental, but also free, Owen supplied when she hesitated. She met his eyes and nodded. "Is that terrible of me?" "No," he said firmly. "He abandoned you and your child. He betrayed your trust in the worst way possible. You're entitled to feel whatever you feel." His understanding, free of judgment, loosened something inside her. Tears came then, not for Chester but for all she had endured, all the fear and uncertainty. Owen moved to sit beside her on the bench, his arm going around her shoulders in comfort. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. When her tears subsided, she pulled back slightly to look at his face. "What happens now?" Owen's expression grew serious. "That depends on what you want, Grace." "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "You and Gabriel are welcome to stay here as long as you wish. The arrangement we have works well enough." Grace studied him, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "But—" Owen's eyes held hers, vulnerability and hope mingling in their depths. "But I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about more than that, about making this arrangement permanent." Her breath caught. "Owen, I know it's soon," he hurried on. "I know you're still processing everything, and if all you want is friendship, I'll respect that completely. But I care for you, Grace, and that boy of yours. Well, I already love him like he was my own." Grace felt her heart expanding with joy. "When I was left at that river's edge," she said softly, "I thought my life was over. I never imagined that it was just beginning." She reached for his hand. "I care for you too, Owen, more than I thought possible after everything that happened." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I don't want to rush you," he said, squeezing her fingers gently. "Take all the time you need." Grace nodded, grateful for his patience. "I don't think I need much time at all," she admitted. "But I would like to get to know you better, as a woman who's truly free to choose her own path." And so began their courtship, an unconventional one, to be sure, with a newborn as constant companion and the practical matters of ranch life as their backdrop. Owen brought her wildflowers from his rides checking the cattle, and Grace baked his favorite pies. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes simply talking about their hopes for the future. Gabriel thrived under their care, growing stronger each day. Owen delighted in each small milestone, the first time the baby followed movement with his eyes, the first time he gripped Owen's finger with surprising strength. As October gave way to November, and the first snows dusted the higher elevations, Grace found herself falling deeply in love with the quiet rancher, who had saved her in more ways than one. One crisp evening, as Gabriel slept peacefully in his cradle, Owen took Grace's hand and led her onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Arizona sky like diamonds on black velvet. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy she could feel in him. Grace's heart quickened. "Yes." Owen took both her hands in his. "I love you, Grace. You and Gabriel have brought joy into my life that I never expected to find. This cabin has become a home since you arrived, and I can't imagine going back to the way things were before." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he explained. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me, Grace? Will you and Gabriel make this your permanent home?" Tears of happiness blurred Grace's vision. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Willits. Eliza stood as Grace's witness, beaming with approval, while the local ranchers and townspeople filled the pews. Gabriel, dressed in a christening gown Eliza had sewn, slept through the entire ceremony in the arms of the minister's wife. As they exchanged vows, Grace looked into Owen's eyes and saw the future she'd once thought lost forever: security, respect, and love that would only deepen with time. The celebration afterward at the boarding house was joyous, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the county. When they finally departed for the ranch, their home, Grace felt a sense of completion she had never known before. That night, as they stood on the porch of the cabin, looking out at the land that was now truly theirs to share, Owen wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. Grace leaned back against him, watching the moonlight silver the distant mountains. "Completely," she answered. "I never thought I could feel this way again." "I plan to make you feel this way for the rest of our lives," Owen promised, turning her in his arms to kiss her tenderly. Gabriel's cry from inside the cabin broke the moment, making them both laugh. "Duty calls," Grace said, smiling up at her husband. "I'll get him," Owen offered. "You rest." As she watched him go to tend to her son, their son now, in all the ways that mattered, Grace thought of the river that had seemed so uncrossable, the future that had seemed so bleak. How strange that the moment of her greatest despair had led her here, to this place of profound happiness. Spring came to the Arizona Territory in a riot of wildflowers and new life. The cattle herd grew with the addition of calves, and the garden Grace had planted beside the cabin began to sprout. Gabriel, now 6 months old, was sitting up on his own and babbling constantly, fascinated by everything around him. On a warm April afternoon, as Grace hung laundry while Gabriel played on a blanket nearby, she spotted Owen riding in from checking the fence line. Something about his expression made her heart skip, excitement barely contained. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted, coming to sweep her into an embrace. "I got the deed," he announced, pulling a document from his saddlebag. "The Henderson place to the north is ours. Another 100 acres, including that spring we've been hoping for." Grace gasped with delight. They'd been saving every penny to expand the ranch, planning for a future that suddenly seemed within reach. "Owen, that's wonderful." He picked up Gabriel, swinging the laughing baby high. "What do you think, little man? Room for more cattle, maybe some horses too. And maybe a brother or sister someday," Grace added softly. Owen looked at her sharply, hope dawning in his eyes. "Grace, are you?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when we were in town. Late October, he thinks." Owen whooped, startling a nearby group of chickens, then carefully set Gabriel down before lifting Grace into a spinning hug. "I love you," he declared, setting her gently back on her feet. "I love you more than I ever thought possible." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, Gabriel sleeping contentedly in his father's arms, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when Chester abandoned me at that river, I thought it was the worst moment of my life." Owen looked over at her, his expression tender. "And now," Grace smiled, placing her hand over his where it rested on Gabriel's back. "Now I see it was the moment that led me to the best parts of my life, to you, to our family. I thank God every day that I rode over that hill and found you," Owen said, "even if I had to build a questionable raft to win your heart." Grace laughed softly. "It wasn't the raft that won my heart," she corrected him. "It was the man who saw someone in need and didn't hesitate to help, the man who showed me what true strength and kindness look like." Owen leaned over to kiss her, a gentle promise of all the years to come. "We've built something good here," he said, looking out over their land. "Something that will last." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their plans for the future, the house they would expand as their family grew, the education they would provide for their children, the legacy they would build together. "I want to start a proper school eventually," Grace confided. "Not just tutoring, a real school for all the children in the area." "You'll be a wonderful teacher," Owen assured her, "and I'll build you a schoolhouse when the time is right." The moon rose, casting silver light across the land they both loved. Gabriel stirred in his sleep, and Owen adjusted him gently, his large hand protective over the baby's back. "I never expected this," he admitted quietly. "After the war, after losing so much, I thought being alone was safer." Grace reached for his free hand, intertwining their fingers. "And now," his smile was warm in the moonlight, "now I can't imagine life without you both, without this." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds of their ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the occasional call of a night bird. "When the new baby comes," Grace said eventually, "I was thinking we might name him or her after your mother or father, to honor your family." Owen's expression softened with emotion. "I'd like that very much." As the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of hours, they continued to share their dreams and memories, building the foundation of their life together word by word, moment by moment. Years later, people in Willits would still tell the story of the pregnant woman abandoned at the river's edge and the rancher who built her a raft, seeing in their love a testament to the best of human nature, even in the harsh realities of frontier life. But for Grace and Owen, it was simply their story, the beginning of a family that would eventually include 4 children, a prosperous ranch, and the first proper school in the county. And on warm summer evenings, long after their hair had turned gray and their children had grown with families of their own, they would still sit together on the porch of the home they had built, hands clasped, watching the sunset and remembering the river crossing that had changed everything. "Best raft I ever built," Owen would say with a wink, and Grace would smile, thinking how the most treacherous waters could sometimes lead to the safest harbors, and how love, like a well-built raft, could carry you across even the wildest currents to exactly where you were meant to be.